everyone. Welcome to the August 26th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona. My usual co-host Craig Milkowski is on vacation this week, but I'm lucky that I have a guest coming on to help handicap a pretty exciting card on Saturday at Saratoga. It is Travers Weekend. That is the feature race on Saturday, but it's a stakes-laden card. The undercard on Travers Day is always stacked with talent, other graded stakes events, and we're going to focus on this podcast on that mandatory Pick 5 sequence running from races 7 through 11, culminating with the Travers, which does go as the 11th race on the card. Actually begins with a non-stakes event, an optional claimer, but then we head right into a series of grade 1 stakes races, the H. Allen Jerkins, the Personal Ensign, the Sword Dancer, and then of course the Travers. All of those races have drawn pretty intriguing fields, some large and small, but a lot of talent throughout, so we're going to try to navigate that sequence, put together a ticket, and discuss some of our handicapping opinions. As I said, Craig on vacation this week. Hope he's having a nice time out at Saratoga, and I think he was heading up to Charlestown tonight as I record this on Friday morning, but happy to have a nice handicapper subbing in for Craig this week, and that is Darin Zoccali, the head of loyalty and retention at Twin Spires, and also, I know, a prolific handicapper on the NYRA circuit. So, Darin, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure, David. Certainly some big shoes to fill for myself today, but I really appreciate you having me on to talk about what is a really cool sequence, and obviously one of the best cards pretty much of the summer, and in fact all year.
Yeah, no, I mean, a little disappointed I'm not going to get up to Saratoga for Travers Day. It's, for horse players, the most magical place on earth. I know you're in a different magical place right now, as I saw you posting some photos from Disney World on Twitter, but hope you're having a nice time down there, I assume with your family, but happy that you're taking some time to discuss the sequence with me, as there is a lot to get through, so let's dive right into the handicapping. And Darin, what we usually try to do on this podcast is, talk about our opinions, and then kind of mention how we might construct our tickets around these races. At the very end, we'll kind of go through how we might try to navigate this sequence with, horses we emphasize, horses we want to fade. I know that's something that you like to think about quite a bit, so we'll try to go through a little bit of that along the way, and also at the end. Let's dive in, though, with race 7. It is that one non-stakes event in the sequence, an optional claiming 62,500, non-winners of 2 other than the allowance condition, going 5.5 furlongs on the Mellon turf course. And when I was making the morning line for this race, this was the toughest race on the card for me to peg a favorite. It's one of those where I was just tempted to make everybody 5-1 and call it a day. I mean, I really don't know how the public is going to approach this one. And it's a tough race to handicap, both from a pace standpoint and just kind of figuring out who's reliable.
Yeah, that's kind of the trick for me. When I start a pick 5 sequence, I've always hoped to not have to spread in the first leg, because I obviously would prefer to have bullets in the chamber as the sequence moved on. But the more I wagered and the more I kind of studied the putting together of tickets, I kind of understood that you just have to rely on your strongest opinions wherever they may be. And it is hard to come up with a strong opinion in this race. As you said, the pace scenario is a bit murky. There's a series of horses that all kind of want to be in a similar spot from a running style standpoint, but there's really nobody in here that's got a tremendous amount of early speed, which can muddle the pace picture a little bit. You have some horses in good form that are stepping up against tougher. There's a horse that I like who's going to have to come from off the pace, but I'm concerned about that with the pace scenario. So like you said, I would have loved to have taken a stand here, but for purposes of the ticket and construction, it's definitely going to be a spread race for me, because I had a hard time focusing in on any one particular horse.
Yeah, I felt the same way. And when I was kind of going through this, I made Ranger Fox the tepid morning line favorite. I'll say, though, if he is favored, he's the kind of horse that I don't really want any part of in this race, because I'm not confident that he can get a clear lead like he enjoyed last time at Belmont Park, and just feels like he's stepping up against much tougher horses after he won at 9-2 last time, and it feels like he could be a similar or shorter price here against a tougher field. So he's not the kind of horse that I want, but trying to beat him, it's hard to settle on anybody. I ended up going a little bit down towards the inside to Maxwell Esquire, a horse that I don't fully trust. He clearly has not been producing his best form recently, but he just had a no-chance trip going a mile last time, wide the entire way on that inner turf course. That was never going to work out for him, and a mile is just too far for him anyway. I like the cutback to 5.5 furlongs, and I'm hoping Mike Maker can kind of resurrect him second off the claim, but he's the kind of horse I would want to get around that 5-1 morning line on, because he's definitely not the most trustworthy sort.
It's the beauty of horse racing. We talked about how difficult of a race it is, and we landed on the same horse. Yeah, I for all the same reasons about Ranger Fox, I shied away from him a bit. I was concerned about him not being able to make a clear lead, the same as you. Maxwell Esquire was my top selection for all the reasons you said. I also like the cutback. The inside starting slot should avoid a wide journey, hopefully, from here. Obviously, the concern cutting back to 5.5 in a spot like this is he will need to work out a trip. He will have to navigate either through or around traffic at some point of the race. But I do think from a class standpoint, he holds an edge over several of these. He did finish a solid third behind Artemis City Limits 2 starts back, who came back to win again next time out at Saratoga. So there is some form for that race coming back as a bit of a key race. And I thought he's faced better horses than what a lot of these have faced throughout the recent months. So for me, it was Maxwell Esquire. It's not a strong lean by any stretch of the imagination, but yeah, he's going to be my top selection here.
Yeah, a horse that I had a tough time kind of making a decision about was the horse drawn right to his outside, the number 3 Discreet 2, and who feels like he's one that's probably going to try to go forward in this race, especially drawing inside. You'd imagine that Arad Ortiz is going to try to secure that hedge position on the Mellon Turf Course now that the rails have come down. He definitely has races in him that make him very competitive here, like that Performance 3 back when he was third behind the Critical Way, who's one of the top turf sprinters in the country, and I thought he was just facing much tougher last time at Colonial Downs. That was a really salty race for a listed stakes event. Hard to trust these connections coming to New York, though. They just haven't had that much success.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. The question of the pace scenario and him having to gun potentially from this post, he'll obviously get around Maxwell Esquire quickly, but Noble Emotion just to his outside is likely to show a good bit of speed. Ranger Fox obviously wants to go. Charmed probably wants to go a bit. So that puts him down inside of potentially 3 other speed types that want to mix it up early. So he might need to get aggressive here. I put him, Noble Emotion, in kind of the same grouping. They'll be on some backup tickets for me as well. The horse that I really wanted to like that I'm going to include, but I'm having a bit of trepidation with it, is Comedy Town. Comedy Town, I think, is well posted here. He's going to work out a good stalking trip, or at least he should. But to be honest with you, and I've been a big fan of Trevor McCarthy for a long time, all the way going back to his days at Parks. You know, he's just having a bit of a tough time this meet at Saratoga, finding the right spots in a lot of these turf events. The other day, he had a loaded horse in Hard Ride Guy, it seemed, and he just kind of rode him up into a wall of horses with nowhere to go. And that's happened to him a couple of times. I think Comedy Town could potentially be live in this race. McCarthy's going to have to work out a better trip with him, though.
No, I completely feel that. I mean, he did have to wait in traffic last time. I thought that some things went right, some things went wrong that day. He saved a lot of ground, and I'm not sure if he was ever beating the winner Dancing Buck, but he did kind of wait a little bit too long to get out of that pocket and behind horses. So I agree, he's definitely a horse that's been in good form right now, just is a little bit trip dependent, especially drawing somewhat outside in this race.
Yep, that's how I took it as well. I'm hoping that he doesn't get hung wide into this far turn. If he does, it could spell a bit of doom for him. But I'm hoping that the pace scenario is strong and Maxwell Esquire can work out a trip, because he's still going to be one of my top horses and will be the main piece of the main body of my number 1 ticket, I would say.
Let's move on to the stakes portion of this Pick 5 sequence, beginning with the Grade 1 H. Allen Jerkins Memorial Race 8. This one going 7 furlongs on the main track for the 3-year-olds, and pretty formidable presence in this race of the number 6 Jack Christopher, a horse that looked pretty unstoppable through his 1-turn races at the start of his career. They tried the 2 turns last time in the Haskell. I think the prevailing opinion is he just doesn't want to go that far. Actually ran fine against some really nice horses, faded a little bit at the end. Turning back to the 7 furlongs is supposed to really work out for him here, but he's facing a much tougher field than the one that he ran into in the Grade 1 Woody Stevens 2 back. He's going to have his running shoes on to beat this field, while he is very much the horse to beat.
He is. The one concern I would have for him is I don't think he's going to get the trip that he's had in his last couple of successful stakes tries, where he just kind of sat off the speed pounced and was able to draw clear. I think Conacher down to the inside is absolutely going 1,000 miles an hour, and I think Gun Knight is going to be moving up as well from the outside. And those two, if they hook up early and Gun Knight gets aggressive from the outside, Jack Christopher, while seemingly finding himself in a good spot behind the speed, could be a little bit farther off the pace than he has been in the past. So it'll be interesting to see what happens tactically, because I do think he's going to have a little bit of more ground to make up coming off of a race that obviously he got tired at the end. The cutback should suit him nicely, but you're going to have to take an extremely short price on a horse facing a much stronger field, as you said.
Yeah, for sure. Conacher, I think, is a really intriguing horse in this race. I agree he's going to be showing speed from the inside. I think he's got no choice but to get an aggressive ride and try to run this group off their feet. And I'm really intrigued to see him step up in class here, because he's the one horse in this race that's been earning speed figures. If you look at the buyers, or I know Craig has given this horse some gigantic TimeformUS numbers, he's got the numbers that really do stack up against Jack Christopher. I know he hasn't been competing in the same races of the stature that Jack Christopher has, but he's shown the kind of brilliance that I think is going to be required to beat that horse. And like you said, it's just going to be a slightly different situation for Jack Christopher to have to chase a really fast horse, kind of collar him, and then have enough left to hold off the closers. I don't doubt that he can do it, but I think you have to decide what's the right price on him. I pegged Jack Christopher at 6-5 on the morning line. Not the kind of horse I'll be that surprised if he gets bet down a little bit, because he just does have that strong reputation coming in here. I think a lot of people expect him to be able to clear this hurdle pretty easily, but I mean, there are some nice horses in here. I mean, even looking beyond Conacher, you've got the two coming out of the Amsterdam to the outside. Gun Knight, who obviously has been beaten by those two horses a couple of times, but Accretive, who has a ton of upside for Chad Brown in just the third start of his career, and that Amsterdam came back a really fast race.
Yeah, it absolutely did. My concern with him is he's got the widest post here, and he could be in full-blown chase mode from the start from this wide draw, where he's kind of asked to keep up early, going to have a lot of ground to make up. And at anything close to 4-1, 9-2, I have a hard time endorsing him chasing down Gun Knight, Jack Christopher, and Conacher. That would be my concern with him. He's got a world of talent and a ton of upside, and he obviously ran extremely well in the Amsterdam behind Gun Knight. This race, the approach for me, though, is probably going to be more of just leaning on the two logical horses quite a bit. I think there's one of two outcomes. I think either Conacher is the legitimate real deal from the inside and can run them off their feet, as you said. And if he runs back to that race 3 starts back, he certainly has a chance to do so. If not, I think Jack Christopher is the most likely winner of the race. And beyond that, I would think somebody else would need to essentially step up and run the race of their life to beat one of those two. And that's kind of how I'm approaching the race.
Yeah, once again, we've got a pretty similar take here. I did make Conacher my top pick in this race, just feeling he'd be a more playable price than Jack Christopher, who I recognize is the horse to beat. In races like this, I often do try to take that the viewpoint that things could fall apart because there's so much speed signed on. It feels like there are a few key horses that really do have to go forward. But the way the Saratoga main track has been playing, it feels like it's really tough to make that run from very far back. I mean, sometimes they tighten up the surface on these big days, and that really doesn't play to the closer's favor. So we'll see what happens there. I couldn't find that sort of closer or turn back that really enticed me in this race. Maybe the one that people might be tempted to go to is Howling Time. Personally, I've never been the biggest fan of that horse, and I'm not sure that shorter is necessarily better for him.
Yeah, we are in sync on that view as well. I thought the same thing going into the Haskell. It's why I didn't like Cyberknife in the Haskell. I kind of took their race in the Matt win and tossed it aside going into that. Now, that's not to say that he can't cut back and run well, but the horse got better as he started to show more speed going longer. And is he really going to be able to keep that form that he found now, cutting back in distance while reverting back to closing tactics where he struggled in races like the Fountain of Youth or the Lexington? Believers are probably going to get a pretty good price on him here. And I can certainly understand the appeal. It wouldn't be the first horse that we've seen cut back from a grade 1 marquee event into a spot like this to perform well. But for all the reasons you said, he's a horse that I would probably just stay away from in this spot.
Let's move on to the next grade 1 stakes in this sequence, race 9. It is the Personal Ensign going 1.125 miles on the main track for the older fillies and mares. And we get a lot of complaints about small fields, and there is just a field of 5 in this race, but it's hard to imagine that too many horses are missing from this personal Ensign. I mean, the 4 favorites are the right 4 horses that are supposed to be in this race. It's shaping up as basically a rematch of that excellent Ogden Phipps that we saw earlier in the year. So even though there's just 5 horses in here, in some ways, this is the race that I'm looking forward to the most on Saturday, because I'm really intrigued to see how these 4 top fillies and mares sort themselves out.
Yeah, with the small field thing, if it's a short field where you have a 3 to 5 favorite who's a standout, and you wanted to get some more horses in there to potentially spice up the exotics, I completely understand the perspective. There's just nobody that you would have put else into this field where you would have said, okay, well, that's a legitimate win contender that's missing. And I don't really think if this race was a 7 or an 8 horse field with 2 or 3 more horses that were going to go off at 20, 30 to 1, that makes the race any better. That's just, personally my take. I agree with you. I think you have 4 horses here that can all win the race depending on how things go. It's certainly going to be fascinating from a pace scenario, because obviously we remember what happened in the Phipps with Latruska and with search results going extremely fast early on. You have to imagine that they're not going to let that happen again, but it wouldn't be the first time that we've seen wild pace scenarios set up a wild result in a race like the Personal Ensign at Saratoga.
Yeah, I agree with that. I kind of went into it viewing Latruska and search results and the duel that they put on in the Phipps the same way. That just kind of went over the line. I don't know if that was the plan, or if Irad Ortiz, who was on search results, just didn't quite execute the plan the way that they had drawn up on paper, because it seems like Chad Brown was not pleased by that, as Irad Ortiz has since been taken off search results. That's the way you have to beat Latruska, to kind of really hound her on the front end. And she's kind of this all or nothing type. Either she sticks her neck out and tries to win the race, or things don't go her way and she just kind of puts her head up in the air and stops running. And that's what happened in the Breeders' Cup and the Ogden Phipps. So I feel like search results in some ways has the most difficult task in this race, or at least Flavien Prat does, because he's got to walk that fine line between applying enough pressure to Latruska to make her run a little bit so that she doesn't get away with some free ride like she did in the Apple Blossom, but also not compromising his own chances and still giving search results a chance to win the race. Because I'm in the camp that says search results ran the best race in the Phipps, and there is a scenario where she would have won that day. They just kind of went way too fast up front early.
Yeah, I made her my top pick here because the race that she ran in the Phipps really made me a fan of her. I thought she ran just an unbelievable race to stay within 2.25 lengths of Clariere and Malathat at the wire. I thought that was just a very courageous effort that showed that she not only has talent, but she has grit. She doesn't like to throw in the towel. When she had every right to completely stop and back up in the stretch, she ran her eyeballs out that day. And the good news was sometimes a race like that could take some of the starch out of you. They put her in the Molly pitcher, maybe giving her a little bit of a layup against a field that she's supposed to beat, but she didn't look any worse for the wear that day, I thought, David. She ran a tremendous race. I know the speed figure did not come back overwhelmingly fast, but that looked to me to be a race where she just kind of did what she had to do, and obviously was not the main goal. They wanted to get a start into her before the Personal Ensign, and they did. I think she's coming into this in razor-sharp form. And if Flavien Prat can walk that fine line, get first run on Latruska, and find a way to make the lead without having to go 109-2 to the 6 furlong marker, I think search results has a chance to lead them through the stretch here and potentially hold off the late bid in Clariere.
Yeah, we've been in agreement through 3 races, so this will give us an opportunity to kind of talk a little bit about ticket structure later from the exact same perspective. So I'll put a positive spin on it that way. But no, I also picked search results in this race. And I mean, what I'll add about her races surrounding that Phipps is that the horses that finished behind her in both the Ruffian and the Molly Pitcher have really come back to flatter that form. We saw Leader of the Band come back to win the restricted stakes last week, the Summer Colony, and horses coming back out of that Ruffian that she won back in May have all improved their speed figures in subsequent starts. So I think those are arguably stronger races than they even appeared at the time. And, I know that the connections and some handicappers have had doubts about search results stretching out to the 9 furlongs. Even Chad Brown kind of was of the opinion she was better going shorter last year. That's why they ran her in races like the Grade 1 Test or the Distaff off the layoff. But I have not liked her sprints that much, and I think she's actually better going longer. And she showed her stamina in that Phipps holding on for third after setting those taxing fractions. I actually kind of like the 9 furlongs for her, since she's going to be forward in this race at Saratoga. That's generally where you want to be. So I'm not really viewing that as a negative as she stretches back out in distance. As for Clairiere and Malathaat, I mean, I just feel like Clairiere, she's coming in now as kind of the horse with the target on her back. She's the leader of this division right now off those last 2 victories. And she still has some things to overcome here because she's a horse that doesn't have that much early speed. She's going to have to close into what's likely to be a more moderate pace than we saw in the Phipps. I mean, I've got the utmost respect for the job that Steve Asmussen's done with her. She's really come back as an improved horse this year. But at what figures to be a shorter price than she's been in her last couple of starts, I kind of wanted to veer elsewhere.
Yeah, I took the same approach. I didn't think the way the race went last time out at Saratoga that she was going to be able to get there in that short field. I thought in that particular race, the pace dynamics, the way the race shaped up on paper was completely going to be against her. I think she just showed that day that she's simply in better form right now than Malathaat. Now she's going to catch a couple of other fillies that do have some speed, and one in Search Results that I think is in the best form of her career. And without that wild speed dueling the Phipps, you can certainly make the argument that Clairiere is not riding a 2-race win streak coming into this. And for those reasons, if she's going to be somewhere around 4 to 5 even money, she's a favorite that I think is worth trying to beat in this particular sequence.
How are you viewing Latruska in this race? I mean, it's kind of crazy to think after her personal Ensign victory last year, which was kind of the highlight of her championship season, that she'd be coming in as somewhat of an underdog this year. I mean, based on that Apple Blossom performance, she does still have efforts in her that make her this good. It's just a little bit hard to trust her, but I know her connections are pretty confident she's going to get back to one of her best races.
Yeah, so the way I'm approaching Latruska, because she's not going to be favored, she might not even be second choice. And even if she is, she might be 5 to 2 or somewhere around there. She has a race in her that certainly can pop up and wire this field at any given point. And because of that, I have to have a ticket that I include her on it, and probably even have a ticket that I have her singled in case that does show up. And I'm certainly going to approach this race where I'm not going to let Latruska go out there and wire this field because she went out in 23-4, 47-4, and just kept going, and I'm tearing up my pick 5 tickets. If she was going to be 3 to 5 in here, maybe I would take a different approach. But given the fact that on the morning line, she's the third choice, and that's probably about what she's going to be at post time, I think it's not a crazy approach to make sure you have her on a ticket, because that scenario certainly could come to hand.
Yeah, I think it's one of those situations where a horse like Malathaat is probably more likely to be in the trifecta than Latruska is, but Latruska is more likely to win the race than Malathaat is. So you want to have her somewhere on your multi-race tickets.
Yep, exactly correct. If I was worried about building exactas and trifectas, Latruska would be the type that I would have her on top only in tickets and no place else.
Let's move on to arguably the most competitive stakes race of the day at Saratoga on Saturday, the Grade 1 Sword Dancer, going 1.5 miles on the inner turf course. A field of 10 signed on for this one. Really tough to sort out the American contingent in this race, 9 US-based runners, along with the European shipper Broom, who I did peg as the slight morning line favorite at 3 to 1. And I think you kind of do have to start the conversation with Broom, because boy, did he run some gigantic race in the Breeders' Cup Turf last year. I know that Yabir got all the accolades for that big stretch run that he put in, passing all those horses in that, short straightaway at Del Mar. But Broom had made this big run around the far turn to get to the front end at that point in the race, and arguably was a somewhat unlucky loser that day. And I know that his form so far this year looks a little bit spotty, but if he comes back with his Hardwick performance too back at Royal Ascot, I don't think any of these Americans are beating him.
Yeah, I mean, his form looks spotty because last time he's running against Pile Driver and Mishriff, and any of these other horses who are running against Pile Driver and Mishriff, all due respect to the American turf contingent, would have absolutely no chance. So I'm not going to be too hard on Broom getting beat 12 lengths in that spot. The race 2 back absolutely beats this field. He is a deserving favorite. maybe he's not a top flight European in terms of being the top tier, but he's one of those, 1B, second top level of the second tier in European runners that when they come over here and face our older horses on the turf, they are extremely tough to beat. Obviously going over the inner turf course at Saratoga potentially is the one thing that concerns me. Tighter turns than what he's seen overseas. Obviously, completely different type of a scenario than races like at the Curragh or at Ascot. So if you want to take an approach that may be the way that the running style over the inner turf, granted this race is a mile and a half, but how that's been playing throughout the meet and how Broome is going to handle that, I could certainly recognize that as being a legitimate concern with a favorite. But on class, he is clearly the horse to beat.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point about the kind of horse that he is. He's one of these gallopers that doesn't really have much of a turn of foot. When you watch his European races, they basically set him down from a long way out and let him kind of go all out for the final 3 furlongs of a race. That's not the way that we typically ride these races in the US. Jockeys are just kind of patient and waiting until they get into the final maybe 3/16 of a mile to really push the button on their horses, and often these races turn into a sprint to the wire. A little bit less so with the marathon. Some horses do come off the bridle a bit earlier, but I think Ryan Moore is aware of that. I like that Aidan O'Brien has brought over a jockey that knows this horse. He's ridden him in his last couple of starts, rode him to that Hardwick victory where he kind of employed those tactics I was talking about, kind of going for home from a long way out. And I think if he does turn this into a test of stamina and gets this horse into a position where he can make that push for home on the far turn, it's going to be pretty tough on the Americans because a lot of these horses, there are some questions about if they want to go a mile and a half. Like Chad Brown has a few in here, Adhamo and Tribhuvan, who are arguably the top 2 contenders from the Brown Barn. I think they both have to answer the distance question. I think people probably assume that Adhamo can do it, given the way he finished in the UN last time. But Tribhuvan, I mean, his 2 races going a mile and a half, I know they featured fast paces, but he just did not finish off those races, and he doesn't strike me as a horse that gets better with more distance.
Yeah, and the other thing with him is how long he can keep his form at this level in Grade 1 competition. We kind of saw it last year where he peaked in the middle of summer going into the United Nations, and then things kind of fell apart for him in the Sword Dancer and the Breeders' Cup. He came back in the Turf Classic at Churchill Downs in his first start of the year, maybe a race that he needed, got back to his best form in the Manhattan, ran okay in the UN. I don't really necessarily think he had any type of an excuse there. I think Adamo's probably just a little bit better of a horse right now. But Tribhuvan going a mile and a half certainly is a question. Adamo has not been asked to do it. His effort in the United Nations doesn't seem to indicate that it should be an issue for him. But closing against Tribhuvan, who's tiring at the end of an 11 furlong race, might make you look like you're moving a little bit better in that end stages of the 11 furlongs than what's going to be required here going 12 furlongs. I thought a horse that was interesting that I'm going to try to get a little bit cute with is Mira Mission. This is a horse that obviously you have to question the mile and a half because he has never run anything close to that before. But it's a talented runner. He's run some big races against some good horses, including Santine in the Turf Classic. We know what he's come back to do. He ran well in the Canadian at Gulfstream Park. He's earned some good speed figures. I think he has enough tactical speed against this group to land a good spot here for Julien Leparoux. I totally admit that the mile and a half is a legitimate question, and I never thought I would like a horse coming out of a 6th place finish in the Forbidden Apple going into the Sword Dancer. But the way the inner turf plays and the trip that he had that day, he had absolutely no chance. And all that's going to do is kind of amplify his potential value at a big number. Is he the most likely winner of the race? Of course not. I might be getting a little bit too cute here, David, but I think this is not necessarily a horse without a chance.
No, I'm certainly not going to talk anybody off a big price of this race. It seems pretty wide open, and it seems like his connections really do want to try stretching him out to this marathon distances because, like you were kind of getting at, there are spots they skipped along the way. I mean, he could have run in that Arlington Million for Ian Wilkes, who does run a lot of horses in Kentucky, and also he skipped the 4-star Dave, which would have seemed like a more logical spot for this horse. So it does feel like this was the plan. They really want to see if he can go this distance. So I guess we'll have to find out if they're right about their horse getting some added ground. a horse that, people kind of like to have takes on, that I know does have a following and is pretty popular, is the number 6 Gouffo, who does have this exciting running style where he kind of has you biting your nails. Is he going to get there? Is he not going to get there? Lately, he's just kind of come up short in his races, leaving himself a little bit too much to do. The connections are putting the blinkers back on for this race. He did wear the blinkers when he won the Sword Dancer last year. I just wonder if he's still in the same form, or maybe this division has just gotten a little bit tougher than it was at this time last year.
Yeah, I think that second point really hit the nail on the head. That's kind of been my thing with him all along. I thought if he was going to be a real force in this division, he had to win the Man of War that day against Highland Chief. I know they went slow early, but he wasn't far behind. And he had every opportunity, I thought, to go by Highland Chief that day, and he just couldn't do it. That race left a really bad taste in my mouth. When he was winning races going long, he was beating horses like Aban, who I know has had a nice career. I don't think Aban is up to the level of what Gouffo was facing, and I think he's facing now better horses than what he was really competitive against. And in a race like this, where there's plenty of horses that are going to be looking to take back and make one run and sprint to the wire, Gouffo at 9-2 is not the one that I'm going to want. I know he's got some good speed figures going back in his form. I've just never been particularly high on this horse in Grade 1 competition, and in a spot like this, he's probably going to be a fade for me.
Yeah, it's a fascinating race. I mean, the other point I would make about Gouffo is with his running style, if you kind of parse his past performances, he tends to do his best running in smaller fields. When the field sizes start to get to the 9, 10, 11, he just starts to struggle. Maybe those are the tougher spots, or maybe he's just a horse that finds himself farther back in those races and has too much to do. So, he was not a horse that I was that interested in this race. I mean, we could go on and on about this Sword Dancer. There are a lot of horses that you could make cases for. We didn't even mention the horse that's run in this race 4 times before, will be making his 5th appearance in the Sword Dancer, Channel Maker, who won this race back in, I believe, 2020. But not sure he's in the same form at the age of 8, but he's definitely going to be a player in this race. He certainly was a pace presence last year. So there are many potential ways to go in this wide open Sword Dancer on Saturday at Saratoga. Darin, let's move on to the final leg of this mandatory payout pick 5 sequence. That is race 11, the Travers, the feature race on this card. Field of 8 signed on with a pretty clear expected favorite, the number 6 Epicenter. One of the few in here among the major contenders who is still lacking that elusive Grade 1 victory. He has run well in a number of Grade 1 spots before, particularly the Derby and the Preakness, but coming in with something to prove in this Travers, it does just feel like he's coming in excellent form, and it's really a question, I think, of how short a price on him is really fair value.
I agree. His Jim Dandy really impressed me. When they went into the first turn, I couldn't believe it. I said, I don't believe he's getting this bad trip again. He's last in the field of 4. How does this keep happening to such a talented horse? And he made a move that really, caught my eye, and being able to just blow by that field coming off the turn and win going away against Zandon, Tony Port, and early voting was just extremely impressive. He's been a hard luck loser of the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness. Obviously, he had legitimate excuses in both those races, I felt, especially in the Preakness, where he had just a dismal trip around the Pimlico racetrack. It does come down to, when you get to the race itself, what type of price you want to take on him in terms of your vertical exotics. In terms of horizontal exotics, there's just no reason to leave this horse off your tickets, especially if you've got value in some of the other legs.
Yeah, so people were asking me how low I think he could possibly go in here. And I mean, when I make the morning line, I am trying to peg these horses right on the money. But I mean, sometimes favorites do get bet down. That's a phenomenon we often see at Saratoga. I have trouble seeing him get bet down lower than the even money 6-5 range, just given some of the names in this race, the presence of 3 Chad Brown runners, Rich Strike, who is such a wild card from a wagering standpoint. I guess I was probably a little bit generous making him 10-1 on the line. I'm not going to be surprised when he gets bet down lower than that, just given the legion of fans that he seems to have following him. So I think Epicenter, if he is in that 6-5, 7-5 range, he's not the worst horse to lean on in this race, because I do think he is about that likely to win the race. I am a little bit curious how they're going to ride him here, because you mentioned kind of being a little bit nervous at the start of that Jim Dandy when he was so far back, and it is kind of odd to see him lose the early speed that he once possessed at the beginning of his career. I've got to think they're going to be looking to get him more forward in this race because I know Steve Asmussen believes he's coming in with the best horse, and I doubt they're going to want to mess around with this trip too much.
Nope, I agree. He's inside of early voting, who's got one move out of the gate, and it's go. So if he can kind of draft off of early voting, cross over in front of Artorias, I think there should be some room for him going the mile and a quarter to land a good spot. If he could sit third or fourth in the first flight of stalkers, I would think that's the ideal spot for him to be going into the first turn.
Chad Brown's got 3 runners in this race. Did any of them interest you that much? I kind of had trouble building a strong case for any of them. I get that Artorias has the upside. I've long been a fan of Zandon. I was left a little bit cold by his Jim Dandy performance last time, but I'm not going to be shocked when he does well here. And I mean, a lot of people do consider early voting to be the main speed of the race. I guess we'll see how that plays out. There are cases to be made for them. I just couldn't quite get there with any of them.
So of the 3, Zandon for me is for my money, clearly the one of the 3 that I think is the most likely winner out of the Chad Brown contingent. His Jim Dandy, I thought he was taken a little bit out of his element, being in the spot where he's sitting second. And I understand there's nothing wrong with that trip in racing. Just for this particular horse, it's just not a spot that he's accustomed to. He's a one move, big move closer. So for him to be stalking early voting early on in that race and being in kind of the spot where he's chasing the speed a little bit, that might have taken some of the starch out of him, so I could forgive that. I also thought that he was fine being even in the stretch after being so forwardly placed in that race. And in a race like this, where I think he's more likely to be farther back, allowed to settle, relax, and make that big one move, I think he has some appeal and some upside to take a step forward. And to be honest with you, at 5-1, I would prefer him to the 7-2 on Cyberknife or the 9-2 on Artorias.
No, I definitely feel that among the Chad Brown runners. I probably would be most positive on Zandon's chances in this race. Cyberknife would be the horse that I kind of spent the longest looking at, trying to pull the trigger on him as the one to put on top of Epicenter in this race. I just couldn't quite get there, even though I tried. I liked his Haskell performance a lot. I thought that move that he made around the far turn, while he was saving ground, he was moving into the fastest part of the race, kind of the point at which Taba came off the bridle and couldn't keep up with the field. So I thought that Cyberknife just really kind of stepped up his game that day and ran the kind of performance that he had always hinted at. The problem I have with Cyberknife is he was 7-1 last time and got a fantastic trip and ride from Florent Giroux. He's going to probably have to work out as good or better of a trip to win this Travers against Epicenter, and he could be half that price. So I had trouble getting to him for that reason, but I do respect this horse's talent.
I agree with you. The mile and a quarter for him is also a bit of an unknown. It's not to say he can't get it. He has not won beyond the mile and an eighth yet. Got up by a head, holding off Taba last time. I agree with everything you said about his trip. Seen a lot of horses come off of impressive Haskells, go to the Travers and not be able to carry that form to upstate New York and duplicate it. This is also a horse that's coming off of lifetime best speed figures. He's got to show that he can pair those up and run back-to-back monster races. So is it impossible? Of course not. But given the fact that he's likely going to be the second choice, he would be a bit of a fade for me because I just don't see the value in him.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. I did make him my second choice in this race, but I just couldn't quite pull the trigger on him to pick him over Epicenter. And it would be this kind of spot where I do lean on Epicenter and use a horses like Cyberknife or Zandon as the primary backups, really kind of at the expense of everybody else. We haven't mentioned the Kentucky Derby winner, Rich Strike, the 80-1 upsetter of the Run for the Roses. Does he just have no chance in this race? Was that the kind of fluky performance we're never going to see from him again? Or is he just not even worth considering because he's not going to be sufficient value?
Maybe a little bit of both, to be honest with you. I obviously think it was a completely fluky Kentucky Derby. Belmont Stakes, I try not to use the Belmont Stakes against any horse because it's such a unique race. And if a horse runs really well in the Belmont, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to run well cutting back to races at a mile and an eighth, a mile and a quarter. And if a horse doesn't run well in the Belmont, it doesn't necessarily have any impact on my view of them going forward. This is just a horse that was 80-1 in the Kentucky Derby because he was supposed to be 80-1, and a perfect storm of wild scenarios played out where somehow, some way he won. I don't envy you being a morning line odds maker in 2022. When I made the odds at the Meadowlands, 10 years ago now. Wow. I didn't have to worry about public opinion money on big name horses, having a public following impacting odds. So it's a weird dynamic when you're making a morning line for a race like this of, okay, what is the betting public's going to rate his chances? But at the same time, it's a horse with this massive following that you don't know how that's going to impact it. And I agree with you. He's going to be a lower price than he's supposed to be. But he wouldn't be on any of my tickets, and it would shock me for the second time if he was able to win this race.
Yeah, I feel the same way about Rich Strike. It's funny, when I put the morning lines out, I feel like I had just as many people dunking on me for making him as short as 10-1 as I did making him as high as 10-1, I guess, depending on what your opinion on Rich Strike is. He's kind of one of those horses that you either love or hate, apparently. But he would not be for me from a wagering standpoint in this race. Well, we've gotten through the entire handicapping portion of the show, and we agreed quite a bit. So let's just take a look back and talk briefly about how we might construct a ticket for this kind of sequence. I'm imagining for you, Darin, it's not the kind of sequence where you're looking to go that deep and you really do want to lean on some horses in a few of these races.
Yeah, absolutely. The seventh race is the race that's going to have the most coverage for me. My major ticket will have Maxwell Esquire. My secondary ticket will likely include horses like Discreet Tune, Noble Emotion, and Comedy Town. And I might have even a deep backup ticket that goes deeper than that, just because I just don't feel like I have a good feel for that race in particular. But my opinions get much more keyed down throughout the rest of the sequence, which enables me to do that. The Jerkins, it's either Conacher or Jack Christopher for me. I'm not trying to get cute in that spot. I'm going to have a heavy lean on search results on a major play ticket going through the personal Ensign. The only other horse I'm probably going to use is Latruska, as I'm going to try to beat Clairiere. The Sword Dancer, I got a little cute with Mirror Mission, but I'm certainly the other two that I'm going to likely use are Adamo and Broom. And then when you get to the Travers, for me, it's probably just Epicenter and Zandon. So the stakes races, I think, are certainly pretty formful. With the exception of the Sword Dancer, I think there's a potential for value with a horse like Mirror Mission. But that's kind of how my ticket's going to look. I'm going to have a lot of options in the first race, and then hopefully my major opinions, what I think are my best opinions, do hit throughout the sequence from that point forward.
Yeah, I mean, I generally try to look at these sequences from the ABC ticket construction standpoint, and I know some people are not big fans of the ABC method. I think some people may just conceive it badly. When you're kind of deciding on your A's, B's, and C's, I think the horses that are your A's should be the horses that you believe are going to be the best value with regard to their chances to win the race, in your opinion, not necessarily just the most likely winners. So I try to construct it that way. So from that perspective, if I was constructing an all A's ticket for the sequence, it would probably start with Maxwell Esquire and Discreet Tune, who I think are the two horses that are the most likely winners from my perspective in a race that I think is totally wide open. So that's why I would kind of key on those two. Then moving on, I would use both Conacher and Jack Christopher. I would search results would be my only A in the personal Ensign, Broom my only A in the Sword Dancer, and Epicenter the only A with some distant backups in the Travers. And then kind of using some B's and C's in the first few legs, but trying to go relatively thin because I don't feel like this is the kind of sequence that I'm anticipating is going to pay a ton. If you're right about it and you can press your strongest opinions, I think it's one that you can reap some value from. But I'm not viewing this as a sequence where I have to, spread on a gigantic ticket to hit it.
No, I agree. That's kind of part of the reason why when I went through these races, I thought it was extremely formful. It's the kind of, I'm going to structure tickets so that if my best opinions are correct, I have an opportunity to hit this maybe 3 or 4 times, which will enhance the expected value. But in looking back at it, I said, okay, of these races, which is the race that I could find something that could potentially be a separator from the other races? And I do think that there is some credence to, in a race where everybody else is going to go deep, if you could really find a strong opinion, it'll help you. But you have to still have a strong opinion in order to do that. And I don't have that strong opinion in the 7th race. The 10th race, if Mirror Mission somehow won this race, I'm going to be sure to maximize my coverage and maximize my ability to be able to hit this thing multiple times, because the way I viewed the Sword Dancer was Broom is absolutely the horse to beat. if for any reason the running style of the race, like we discussed, the tighter turns of the inner turf at Saratoga, if any of that provides any type of a roadblock for Broome, I thought this race really opens up a lot. And when it opens up a lot, my best opinion is Mirror Mission. That's kind of how I viewed Mirror Mission as a potential separator for me, if I could strike on that. But if not, I think this is not necessarily a sequence that's going to pay a ton, and you're going to want to have several tickets going through your best opinions to try to hit this multiple times.
No, I think that's a really great way to look at it. The role of a horse like Mirror Mission in your sequence is important to figure out, and how you can maximize your profits with a horse like that. And I would assume, I don't want to put words in your mouth, that that's also the kind of horse that you might just place a win bet on, irrespective of what you're doing in a pick 5 sequence.
Oh, absolutely. If I hit Mirror Mission and I don't have a win bet, and I get to the Travers and somehow Rich Strike wins from dead last and knocks me out of everything, that's the kind of thing that sends you into a tailspin. So yes, absolutely, that there will be a good win bet on Mirror Mission if he's 12-1. 10, I would say 10-1 or up. I would have a pretty good win play on Mirror Mission, and also have some vertical exotics keyed around him as well.
Yeah, that's really good advice. You don't want to get too one-dimensional with your plays in these races, and so laser focused on just hitting one type of bet. You want to play the races in such a way that you're making profits based on your opinions, not just trying to hit a specific wager because that's what you set out to be your goal. Well, Darin, I really appreciate you coming on to discuss these opinions on Travers Day, a little bit of how we could construct these tickets, and hopefully we give out some good information that can help people playing this Travers Day card. It's a really excellent day of racing. We talked about maybe some of the more straightforward races from a handicapping standpoint, but I'm guessing you looked at the rest of the card as well. Some wide open races, both early and late, that you can make some cases for bigger prices. So it should be an excellent day of racing on Saturday.
Oh, I'm really looking forward to it. Even the first two races, the two-year-old races, there were some serious pedigrees in there. You have a horse that's actually a half brother to Persistently, running in a turf race in his debut, and of course it's the day of the Personal Ensign, and Persistently was the mare that upset Life and 10 and Rachel Alexandra in that great Personal Ensign about 10 or 11 years ago. So I thought that was kind of an interesting little tidbit, that the half brother to Persistently is running on this card with the Personal Ensign. But there are some serious pedigrees and some serious looking 2-year-olds in the first two races as well. So yeah, there's a lot of different interesting elements in the world of horse racing going through this card, and one that I'm really looking forward to.
No, that's a great point about those pedigrees. And even in the first race, you've got that half-brother to Midnight Bisou, who, of course, ran well in the Personal Ensign. So some definite Travers Day connections there. Yeah, it's an excellent day of racing, and looking forward to it. Darin, if people want to find out your picks or follow you, just kind of give us a plug to where they can find out that information from you.
Yeah, just head on over to Twitter at the Track 7. We put out our picks for Saratoga. We have a lot of different tickets for different racetracks throughout the day as well. Expert pick video selections are up there. I do NYRA all meet long, whether it be Saratoga, Aqueduct, Belmont as well, and also dabble in just about anything that comes up with big carryovers and things of that nature. So hit me up on Twitter at the Track 7, and you can get all the information you need.
Darin, really appreciate you taking the time to do this, to come on the podcast. Everybody, thanks for listening this week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Forum channel. Craig, I believe, will be back next week, so he should rejoin me to do our TimeformUS Pacecast on Tuesday when we recap these races, so make sure to check that out when we put that out on Tuesday afternoon. Everybody, thanks for listening, and good luck on Travers Day Saturday.